Alan Kelly, Simon Coveney, Owen Murphy and now Darragh O'Brien. All ministers who stood in this chamber saying the words, "The housing crisis can't be fixed overnight." And it is more than a decade where that hackneyed phrase has been trotted out as some kind of defence over and over again. And the truth is that this isn't an unfixable problem. But there is an issue. Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil have an ideological objection, in my view, to taking the necessary steps to fix the issue. And I'll give you a couple of examples of that. Right now, there are about 1 million people who are in housing distress in this state. Either they're grappling with spiralling rents, they're on housing waiting lists, or they're trying to buy a home where prices are going nuts. Even there's people still in mortgage distress from the last housing crisis who are going around the courts at this moment in time. And yet, we have a situation where NAMA has 577 acres of land and could be directed to provide for 4,000 cost rental houses and 4,000 affordable houses a year. But the Taoiseach sat in roughly your seat today, Minister, and he made an argument against that. He made the argument on 2 points. He said, first of all, there is legislation which underpins the mandate in which NAMA has to operate, and also it was NAMA's job to protect the taxpayer. Well, here's the news. You guys are the government. You can change that legislation at any stage that you want. An argument for the fact that there is legislation is not an argument at all. And secondly, with regards to protecting the taxpayer, it's absolutely incredible. There are 70,000 families currently on HAP or RAS in this state at the moment. At least €600 million is being spent by the state, giving it to private landlords, money that could be going to buy or build social housing. So there is no protection of the taxpayer with regards to that type of spend. I'll give you another example. The vacant site tax is probably a neon light example in relation to this. When the government introduced the vacant site tax a number of years ago, I opposed it as strong as I could, because I knew at that stage it was going to be a dud tax. And a dud tax is what it was. It was never properly implemented. It never made a scratch on any speculator with regards to prices of land. And last year, it's reported that it took in €21,000. Now, any government that produces a tax that probably costs more to draft and implement than it takes in a given year is a government that doesn't mean what they say, or is actually so useless they can't produce that tax properly. So it was replaced then by the zoned land tax just a couple of weeks ago. And when we pushed the Minister for Finance on that, the Minister for Finance admitted that it was going to have a tax reduction for landlords or for landowners, and also that it wasn't going to be implemented for 2 or 3 years. Now, 10 years of saying that it can't be fixed overnight, and yet they're pushing out the implementation of a tax that could motivate landowners in pushing land into use, shows they're not interested in doing it, they have an ideological opposition to it, or there is an emergency deficit within government. An emergency deficit that's not shared by people staying on the streets. That's not shared. There are 10 hostel beds available tonight for students. If you're female and you don't want to share with males in a room, there are 2 hostel beds available. There's an urgency amongst that cohort of people that is simply not reflected in the actions that this government has taken. The vacant home tax. I sat again in the committee opposite Pascal Donoghue in relation to this, and he says, well, we shouldn't really implement it now because we don't know if it would make any difference. We don't really know how many houses are actually vacant at the moment, and we don't know what their circumstance is. Now, this country has 180,000 homes today that are empty. If you take that half of those, or possibly could be used for housing, it would have an enormous impact. A tax could actually be implemented in relation to getting those houses back into use. That money could be ring-fenced and used as a grant to help those houses getting back into use. But the government are not interested in doing it right now because there's an ideological block. And the question is for the Green Party, are you going to go with that ideological block as a passenger on this bus, or are you ever going to make an impact with regards to the direction you're going with the government in this? There's plenty of other examples. The capping of rents only happened when the inflation rate got to about 3.5%, which basically made that the cap was of no use whatsoever. That's not an action of a government that means business. This issue could be fixed. The government is opposed ideologically to the necessary solutions.